Hey guys, so today I am here to talk about Richard Kuklinski, aka the Iceman murderer, aka an American murderer and a hitman. So he says. Also, we're gonna do what Queen Miss Bailey Sarian does. We're gonna do our makeup and talk about some crazy ass people. Since it is October, I decided that I'm gonna be doing some Halloween makeup looks, and it's like basic. I'm not gonna be doing a whole crazy thing, at least not this video. Richard was born on April 11th, 1935. He did die on March 5th, 2006. He was sentenced to life imprisonment after he was convicted of killing 2 members of his burglary gang and 2 other people that he knew. So like these were all, since he was a hitman, you know, he knows people know him, they chit chat, they kill people together. So he was born in his family's apartment on 4th Street in Jersey City, New Jersey. He was born to Stanley Kuklinski and Anna. That was his mom and dad's names. His life growing up wasn't the best life, but that's like what we have figured out is like a regular for all these serial killers. Stanley, his dad, was a violent alcoholic. He beat his children regularly, and sometimes he would also beat his wife. So both of his parents were abusive to him, both Anna and Stanley. He had 3 siblings, an older brother, and then a younger brother, and then a younger sister. So let me tell you how abusive Stanley, the father, was towards them. He was so abusive to the point that he actually killed one of his children. His name was Florian, which was Richard's older sibling. Florian actually died at the age of 7 from injuries inflicted by his father. So his father beat him so badly that he died. The cops showed up and the whole family said that the child had fallen from the stairs and that it was an accident. Nothing was really done about that, but because of that, Stanley did leave the family and he just went on his own way. But the low-key kind of messed up thing, he would come back periodically and beat them, right? Like he left because he beat one of his children to death, but he's like, no, let me just come back and, you know, like do it again. He was a violent alcoholic, so he would come back and beat them, but he would also be drunk. He would also beat his wife occasionally, and Anna was also abusive towards her children. Another fact about his family, crazy thing about the younger brother too, Joseph, he was convicted of killing and killing and raping a 12-year-old girl. Crazy, right? So he got life in prison for that. So the crazy thing about what he did is he raped this girl and then he threw her off of a 40-foot building. And not only did he do that, he also threw her pet with her, which was like a dog. So he threw both of them off, killing them. Crazy enough, they ended up being in the same jail together, or like prison. When asked about it, Richard was just like, you know, we have the same dad, so what do you expect? But that's like how he talked. He talked very nonchalant about his crimes, everything that he did. Like he was a hitman for the mob, for the mafia, and that's what he would say. He was like, you know, I never really saw it as being an assassin. He's like, I was just doing my job, and that was that. That's how he was a very nonchalant, very cold killer. And that's why a lot of people would want to be like, oh, you know, he's the Iceman Killer. But there's actually a story behind why he was named the Iceman Killer, which I will let you guys know. So moving on, he was abusive towards animals. In his neighborhood, he would get 2 cats, tie them together by their tails, and then fling them on, I think it was clothing lines, and he would just watch them tear each other apart. But in his interview, he also said that he wouldn't stick around to actually watch them die, but he would just do that because he was like, you know, I was bored in my neighborhood. What else do you do when you're bored? He did say that also while growing up, there was an incinerator in his neighborhood. And what he would do is get the cat, a stray cat, a neighborhood cat, and throw it into the incinerator and watch it burn. He said that he would watch the cat run around in there and slowly, basically burn to death. And he said that one time he threw a cat in there and it almost jumped right back out, but he threw it right back in. He was a very cold person. So, moving on, Richard gets married. He actually ends up getting married twice. His first marriage was to a woman of 9 years. Her name was Linda. Him and Linda had 2 sons together. And, you know, not much is really said about that relationship. You know, they ended up getting a divorce, I assume. And he moved on and he met this other lady named Barbara. Him and Barbara, they got married in 1961. They had 2 daughters, Merrick and Kristen, and a son named Dwayne. Barbara would describe him as having 2 behaviors, or like 2 personas, or well, not really personas, but she would just describe him as being like good Richie and bad Richie. She said that good Richie was a affectionate father. He provided for his family and he was a loving husband. So she said that one time one of their children was really sick, that he stayed up all night taking care of them. Richard also always showered his family in a lot of gifts. He bought them Christian Dior. He took them to expensive restaurants. He bought them expensive jewelry. And, you know, you're like, how did he do all that? Like we said earlier, he was a hitman. So, obviously, I guess they get paid very well by the mob. That's how he would be able to afford all that. So, Bad Richie, he would appear at irregular times, irregular intervals, like sometimes one day after another, and other times he wouldn't come around like for months. He had unpredictable fits of rage, so he would smash furniture, and during this time he was physically abusive towards his wife. One time he broke her nose and he gave her a black eye, and he was emotionally abusive towards his children too, but like not physically abusive towards them. So Merrick, his daughter, she said that she remembered that once he killed her dog right in front of her to punish her for coming home late. So that's like the type of emotional abuse he would give to his children. So one time Barbara said in an interview that during an argument in the car, she told Richard that she wanted to see other people. What did Richard do? He responded by silently jabbing her from behind with a hunting knife. And it was so sharp that she didn't even feel the blade go in. He told her that she belonged to him and that if she tried to leave him, he would kill her entire family. So when Barbara began screaming at him in anger, obviously, like what would be the normal response? He throttled her into unconsciousness. The Kuklinski family and their neighbors were never aware of his activities. They just believed that he was a successful businessman. Barbara suspected that at least some of his income was from illegal activities because of their lifestyle and the large amounts of cash he would often have, but she never expressed worries to him about it. She had a don't ask questions philosophy when it came to his business life. If he left in the middle of the night, she never asked where he was going. They did end up getting a divorce in 1993 while Richard was in prison. She said the divorce was due to money reasons. After the divorce, she did continue to visit him in prison. She did go like once a year to visit him. Richard Kuklinski he wasn't your ordinary type of serial killer or murderer. So authorities described him as unusual amongst both mobsters and killers. Apart from his violent temper, he had like a few vices. So he wasn't an abuser of alcohol or other drugs. He wasn't a womanizer, but he did gamble and he did lose a lot of his money that way. So he didn't have the usual reasons for killing people. Like, he didn't do it for revenge, he didn't do it for lust. He did it because it was his job, because he was a hitman and he was told to kill them. And it was just business, as he would say. He said he killed like 100 to 200 people because of his job and stuff like that, but there were only like a handful of murders that were actually connected to him. So we're going to talk about what he was charged with and what actually was like connected to him. So in the mid 1960s, he began working at a Manhattan film lab. So through the lab, he was able to get master copies of movies, like popular movies like Disney movies and stuff like that. So he would sell them and make a profit off of it, you know, bootlegging movies. So then he later discovered that porn movies also were a big hit. So he started copying and distributing porn and drugs. Several of his known murder victims were men he had met through trafficking, porn, and drugs. He was also in a gang which specialized in stealing brand new Corvettes and carrying out burglaries. He was once arrested on a bad check, and that was the only crime that he was arrested, or like that he was charged with prior to the arrest of his murder charges, which is crazy. Kuklinski said that he had his income by working as a freelance contract killer. That was his main source of income. Getting into his killings that he was charged with. First one is Roy DeMeo. So he met him when he borrowed money from a loan shark with mob connections. So when he missed a payment, he was visited by DeMeo and two other men. So they beat him and they pistol whipped him. He was left with a scar on his forehead. And then DeMeo employed him as a debt collector, an enforcer, and a hitman. So Kuklinski later claimed that he killed DeMeo. DeMeo was found dead in the trunk of his car in January 1983. Crazy, crazy, crazy. So that was the first guy. The second guy was Mr. Robert Pronge. So in the early 1980s, Kuklinski became acquainted with another killer, Robert Pronge, aka Mr. Softy. He got the name because he used to drive a Mr. Softy truck, ice cream truck, and he did this because he would drive around in the truck, sell ice cream to these little kids. He was like trying to be inconspicuous while he was surveilling for his next victim, which he would be selling ice cream to these little kids, and then later on he'd be like murdering their fathers. Pronge claimed to be a special forces veteran and an explosives expert. He said he knew a lot about poisons, and he taught Kuklinski how to use cyanide as a murder weapon. So Mr. Pronge was actually the one that taught Kuklinski a lot, because that's what Kuklinski talks about being his favorite way of killing, cyanide. And he also advised them on how to cover up a murder, and I'll get to that in just a second. So one of his favorite methods was to put cyanide in a nasal spray bottle and squirt an unsuspecting target, and bam, you're done. That's it. Kuklinski said that they did a lot of murders together. They killed a lot of people together. He also said that Pronge was the one that suggested to freeze the body of Louis Masque to see if the time of death could be disguised. And we're gonna get to that also soon. But focusing on Pronge, the two of them fell out when Pronge allegedly asked Kuklinski to murder his ex-wife and his son, and Kuklinski refused. So during an argument that followed, Pronge told Kuklinski that he knew where he lived and he threatened his family. Dun-dun-dun. And so obviously Kuklinski was not a fan of that. He was like, oh hell no, you did not just tell me that. On August 10, 1984, Pronge was found dead in his Mr. Softy truck with 2 bullet wounds on his chest. Investigators later stated that they regarded Kuklinski as a prime suspect, but they decided not to file charges because like by then he had already been convicted of other murders. So that's why they didn't go through with it. Moving on to number 3, George Malaband. So on February 1st, 1980, Kuklinski and a business associate named George Malaband were driving to New Jersey, and after an argument which Malaband threatened Kuklinski's family, so again somebody else threatened his family, Kuklinski brought the van to a stop, and without warning he pulled his revolver from his pocket and shot Malaband in the chest 5 times, killing him. So Malaband's body was found days later near the Chemex chemical plant in Jersey City. So it had been stuffed into a 55-gallon drum. So it had been rolled to the bottom of a palisade. Kuklinski had cut the tendons of Malaband's leg in order to force it into the barrel because he was too big. He just cut it and stuffed it in there. So that's how Mr. Malaband died. So moving on, Mr. Paul Hoffman. In 1982, Kuklinski met Paul Hoffman, a 51-year-old pharmacist, and he would go to the store in Paterson, New Jersey, which was a storefront with a large back room where a wide variety of stolen items could be bought and sold. Hoffman wanted to make a big profit by purchasing at a low cost large quantities of stolen Tagamet, a popular drug used to treat peptic ulcers. He was going to resell this through his pharmacy and obviously make a big profit because you know how that works. So he believed that Kuklinski could sell him this drug. So he kept asking him to make a deal. So on the afternoon of April 29th, 1982, Hoffman and Kuklinski met at a warehouse leased by Kuklinski. So Hoffman brought $25,000 in cash with him to purchase it. So after Hoffman gave him the money, Kuklinski told him that the deal was a ruse. So Kuklinski placed the barrel of his pistol under Hoffman's chin and he pulled the trigger. So the shot only wounded Hoffman. So Kuklinski tried to shoot him again and the gun jammed. So then he was like, okay, he just resorted to killing Hoffman by beating him to death with a tire iron. So that reminds me of like Toretto. You remember what Toretto did when he was in prison? Anyways, Kuklinski placed Hoffman's corpse inside a 50-gallon drum, and he filled it with instant cement. So he left it on the sidewalk outside of a motel behind a luncheonette called Harry's Corner. So then he would just like come to it and monitor it to see if anybody like noticed it or anybody was talking about it. So he would sit in Harry's corner every day to see if anyone talked about the barrel or anything like that. So after what Kuklinski said was like a long time, he noticed that one day when he showed up, it just wasn't there anymore. So sadly, Hoffman's body was never recovered. Number 5, Gary Smith. By the early 1980s, Kuklinski's burglary gang was coming under more scrutiny from law enforcement. So in December 1982, Percy House, he was a member of the gang, he was arrested. So House would later agree to testify against Kuklinski and was placed in protective custody. So warrants were also issued for 2 more gang members, Gary Smith and Daniel Deppner. So Kuklinski urged them to lie low and rented them a room at the York Motel in New Bergen, New Jersey. So Kuklinski was angered when he learned that Smith had left the motel to visit his daughter. He was scared because Smith had recently spoken to him about giving up crime and like going straight, and he was scared that he might become an informant against him. So Kuklinski, Deppner, and House, who was at jail at the time, they decided that Smith had to go. So Kuklinski and Deppner fed Smith a hamburger laced with cyanide, and then he was taking too long to die from the cyanide than what they expected. So Kuklinski, he grew impatient and he ordered Deppner to strangle Smith with a lamb cord. Yeah, so according to a forensic pathologist, Michael Baden, Smith's death would probably have been attributed to something non-homicidal in nature, like drug overdose, for instance, if Kuklinski relied solely on the cyanide. But since he got impatient, they're like, yep, obviously this is like murder, girl, right? The ligature mark around Smith's neck, and also the fact that the body had been deliberately hidden, it just proved to the investigators that he was murdered. And Deppner's ex-wife, Barbara, failed to return with a car to remove the body. They placed it between the mattress and the box spring of the bed in the motel. So over the next 4 days, a number of people rented the room, and they never found out. They just they smelled something, but they never checked under the bed to actually see. So finally, on December 27th, 1982, after more complaints from guests about the smell, the motel manager investigated and found Smith's decomposing body. Sad again. So after Smith's murder, Kuklinski moved Deppner to an apartment in Bergenfield, New Jersey, and it actually belonged to Rich Patterson. He was then the fiance of Kuklinski's daughter, Merrick. Patterson was away for a while, but Kuklinski had access to the apartment. So at some point between February and May of 1983, Deppner was killed by Kuklinski. They found this out because investigators found blood stains on the carpet. I'm guessing they were able to tie back to obviously Daniel Deppner. Kuklinski asked Patterson for help to dispose of the body. He told Patterson that the victim was a friend who had been in trouble with law enforcement, and that someone must have broken in and killed him over the weekend. Deppner's body was found on May 14th, 1983. He was found by a cyclist that was riding down Clifton Road in a wooded area of West Milford in New Jersey. The cyclist spotted the corpse being preyed on by turkey vultures. So Kuklinski had wrapped the body inside green garbage bags before dumping it. So medical examiners listed Deppner's cause of death as undetermined. Although they noticed pinkish spots on his skin, and like that's a possible sign of cyanide poisoning. Deppner had also been strangled, so they saw both of those things. Law enforcement theorized that Deppner must have been incapacitated by like poison or something, as he had no defensive wounds, and healthy adult men are rarely killed by strangulation. So like, you know, you would put up a fight, is what they're saying. The medical examiner found that Deppner's stomach was full of food, which means that it had not been digested yet, which means that he was either killed during a meal or right after a meal. So they discovered that he had some burned beans in his stomach. So they reasoned that it must have been a home cooked meal, because restaurants aren't going to serve you burned beans or burned anything. Investigators noted that the body had been discovered about 5 kilometers from a ranch where the Kuklinskis often went horseback riding. Deppner was the third associate of Kuklinski's to have been found dead. Next is Lois Maskey. So on September 25th, 1983, the body of Lois Maskey was found near a town park off Clausland Mountain Road in Orangetown, New York, with a bullet hole in the back of his head. So Maskey had disappeared over 2 years earlier on July 1st, 1981. That is one of the first ones that I told you, but I kind of just told you like a little bit about him. Didn't really tell you what happened. On July 1st, 1981, the day he was due to meet Kuklinski to purchase a large quantity of blank VCRs tapes for $100,000. Like, that's crazy. Kuklinski attempted to disguise Maskey's time of death by freezing him. He stored his corpse in an industrial freezer for the next 2 years. So he later said that it was advised by Robert Pronge to do that, which I let y'all know that earlier. And also authorities assume that the freezer must have been supplied by Pronge, and that is what was used to store Maskey's body, since he was Mr. Softy and he did have an ice cream truck. However, Kuklinski didn't allow the body to thaw out completely. He went ahead and dumped the body out on a hot summer day, and he wrapped the body in plastic garbage bags, which kept it insulated and partially frozen. So the Rockland medical examiner found ice crystals inside the body on a warm September day. Had the body thawed completely before discovery, the medical examiner stated that they probably wouldn't have known his trick. But detectives also realized that Maskey was wearing the same outfit that he was described wearing from his family on the day of his disappearance. The discovery that Kuklinski had frozen Maskey's body is what led authorities to nickname him the Iceman Killer. So that's where he got the nickname, and not by his cold demeanor. Moving on to the manhunt and how he was actually caught. Kuklinski first came to the attention of Pat Kane, a detective in the New Jersey State Police. With help from an informant, Kane connected him to a gang who were carrying out burglaries in northern New Jersey, and he began to start a file on him. So eventually he got the 5 homicides, which was the deaths of Hoffman, Smith, Deppner, Maskey, and Maliban that I told you about. So they were linked to Kuklinski because he was the last known person to be seen with them alive. So in 1985, a division of New Jersey Criminal Justice Department, they created a task force, and it was just for arresting and convicting Richard Kuklinski. The task force nicknamed Operation Iceman. They have cool names. So they based its case almost entirely on the testimony of undercover agent, special agent Dominic Polifron, and the evidence built by Kane. Starting in 1985, Kane and Polyphron worked together with Phil Soliman, a close longtime friend of Kuklinski. They worked with him in order for him to get them close with Kuklinski. Polyphron was posing as a mafia-connected criminal named Dominic Provenzano. Polyphron told Kuklinski he wanted to hire him to carry out a hit against a wealthy Jewish associate in a cocaine deal robbery. And he recorded Kuklinski speaking in detail about how he would do it. So Kuklinski was like bragging over here to this undercover cop. He was also recorded boasting that he had once killed a man by putting cyanide on his hamburger, and his plans to kill a couple of rats, which was Barbara Deppner and Percy House. So Kuklinski claimed in an interview that Solomon was the only friend he did not kill. And he was just like, you know, he was the only friend I didn't kill. He was the one friend that got me put in prison. It's crazy how that works. So on December 17th, 1986, it was arranged for Kuklinski to meet Polyphron to get cyanide for a planned murder. The planned murder was an attempt on a police detective working undercover. So after being recorded by Polyphron, Kuklinski went for a walk by himself. He tested Polyphron's cyanide on a stray dog. He used a hamburger as bait and saw it was not poison. So he got suspicious and he decided not to go through with the planned murder and went home instead. He was later arrested at a roadblock 2 hours later, and a gun was found in his car. And his wife was also with him at the time. His wife was charged with trying to prevent his arrest. She was charged with possession of an illegal firearm, as she had been in the car when it was found. And prosecutors charged Kuklinski with 5 murder counts and 6 weapon violations, as well as attempted murder, robbery, and attempted robbery. Officials said that Kuklinski had large sums of money in Swiss bank accounts and a reservation on a flight to that country. So Kuklinski was held on a $2 million bail bond and made to surrender his passport. So at his trial, a number of Kuklinski's former associates gave evidence against him, as did Rich Patterson and Polyphron. So the recorded conversations with Polyphron were the most damaging evidence, which, you know, it was him boasting about it. It was him talking about it, him agreeing to, like, you know, do this hit. So in March 1988, a jury found Kuklinski guilty of murdering Smith and Deppner, but found that the deaths were not proven to be by Kuklinski's own conduct, meaning he would not face the death penalty. So to avoid a second trial for the murders of Maliban and Maskey, Kuklinski agreed to plead guilty to both of them. The state deemed there to be insufficient evidence to convict Kuklinski for Hoffman's murder, as the body had not been recovered. In return for a confession and Kuklinski's assistance in recovering Hoffman's remains, the charges for that murder were dropped, and as part of a deal, the gun charged against his wife was dropped, and an unrelated marijuana possession charge against his son were also dropped. So Kuklinski received 2 60-year sentences, one for killing Smith and Deppner, and then the other for killing Maliban and Maskey, which would run concurrently. So he was ineligible for parole until he was 111 years old, the year 2046. He was incarcerated at Trenton State Prison. During his stay at the prison on October 2005, after nearly 18 years in prison, Kuklinski was diagnosed with Kawasaki disease, which is like an inflammation of the blood vessels. He was transferred to a secure wing at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. Although he had asked doctors to make sure they revived him in case anything happened, like a heart attack or anything like that, his former wife, Barbara, had signed a DNR form, a do not resuscitate order. A week before his death, the hospital called Barbara to ask if they wanted to take away that order, but she declined. So Kuklinski died at the age of 70 on March 5th, 2006. That's who Richard Kuklinski was. The Iceman Killer. He was very interesting in the sense that just the way that he talked about all of these killings whenever I watched his interviews. So you can see them on HBO. It's called The Iceman, and it's interviews of him speaking about his murders and all that. The way he talks about it was just him being so nonchalant about it. He didn't really care. An interviewer asked him, you know, do you feel bad about any murders? Is there one that stands out to you specifically? And he would just be like, no, I don't feel bad about any of the murders because I don't think about them. He's like, so if I don't think about them, I can't feel bad or anything like that. I'm just like, wow, okay. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all in my next video. Maybe, possibly, hopefully.